country. Hello, Namaskar, welcome to my pod, the CAA Show. CAA, as all of you know, is Conversations and Analysis, and my name is Juggi Bhasin. Every conflict is a time for introspection, but it is also a time for an opportunity. In every conflict, somebody wins or somebody loses. And therefore, a lot of people feel that the Israeli conflict, first of course with the Palestinians, then with the Hezbollah, and now with Iran, actually is a kind of an opportunity for Israel to clean up its enemies, the people who trouble Israel, but also perhaps as some kind of a service to humanity. A lot of people feel that this is what is really what is going on, but in the process, something even bigger is actually happening. Inadvertently, the Israelis are also destroying the left liberal narrative in the world. And this is what I'm going to talk about today in my podcast. More than the Israeli-Iran conflict, that of course is an important subject, but that will be a podcast for another day. But today I want to discuss the contours, the dimensions of this left liberal narrative, which the Israelis by their actions are actually tearing into shreds. But before I do that, as always, I would urge all of you to subscribe to my channel. It's very, very simple, really. Press on that red button on your screen. Subscription is, of course, completely free to the CAA show. I would also appreciate if you could like the show and share this video with your friends, with your colleagues, and your peers. Thanks for listening to this message. Now let's go and dive back right into this very, very important and interesting topic. What really has this conflict in the Middle East really thrown up for us? What is that big message which is coming across for the entire world, I would say, and especially for a country like India? The big message is that it finally redefines for us what really is terrorism. It defines and clearly demarcates for us who are the terrorists and who are the people who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. Because what really has been happening in the last 1 or 2 years has been that there has been this obfuscation, there has been this confusion, deliberately created confusion of who actually a terrorist is. And in the process, what really has happened is that we forgot that terrorism is actually carried out by terrorists. It is actually carried out by these paramilitary organizations. It is carried out by these deep state actors rather than so much by countries. And in the process, what really was happening was that the left liberal cabal had started dubbing countries like Israel, India, I would say even Russia to that extent, as terrorist abetting states. This was a narrative which was going on, but this Israeli action has made this absolutely clear who the real terrorists are, and the definition of terrorism is again the same kind of definition which we used to hear when we used to hear the definition of terrorism in the days of 9/11 and 26/11. So it's come back to that point in time to that extent. So in that sense, a lot of people feel that this is like a service to humanity what they have done. Also something very significant, there were a lot of these actions carried out by these terrorist organization, by these extremist elements which were receiving no notice in the world. Just to give you an example, for example, the plight of the Bangladeshi Hindus who are being butchered, who are being they were being harassed, they were being persecuted by these radical elements in Bangladesh. No notice was given, or they were ignored. Then these Pakistani attacks, terror attacks in India, nobody of course wanted to talk about them in the world. Nobody was giving notice to them. They were completely ignored, where we all know the number of attacks which have taken place in Jammu and the lives which have been lost. And then again, there was this other major incident which happened in Russia a few months back, where I think it was in a shopping mall that more than 200 people were killed, again by extremists. And surprisingly, nobody talked about that, nobody noticed that. It was almost as if we were closing our eyes to who the real terrorists were in the world, and we were focusing on this false left liberal narrative that certain nation states like, as I said, I'm repeating again, like Israel, India. These were the states which are actually behind all kinds of ills which are pervasive in the world. And then this entire movement which was taking place in the universities in America, the movement which is taking place, the protests and the demonstrations and the marches which are taking place in Europe, all banding under this banner of the Palestinian cause. Because what really was going on was that people were using the Palestinian cause as to project the left liberal narrative, as to paint certain nation states as aggressors, as to, in a way, put the lid or to put the wraps, I would say, on the real terrorist organization, the real terrorism perpetrators. They were fooling people all over the world. This was the great disservice, I would say, which this cabal, left liberal cabal, had been doing all along. But fortunately, in a certain sense, the Israeli actions have made these demarcations very clear, that who are the real terrorists and who are not the terrorists. And how have they done that? Let's talk a little bit about that also. The single biggest reason I think that they have managed to succeed in doing that is by the way they have gone after the Hezbollah and especially after Nasrallah. Why Nasrallah becomes very, very important? Nasrallah becomes very, very important because more than any other terrorist commander, more than any other paramilitary organization head, Nasrallah, I think after Osama bin Laden, has been the person who has been in our consciousness, in the consciousness of the world for a very, very long time, but especially now. He has been a figure which has dominated our consciousness for the right reasons, maybe for the wrong reasons. You can pick and choose a side. That's okay. But Nasrallah was very, very important. But the Israeli actions on two fronts. That is, first on the pagers, the way they orchestrated this entire pager operation. What it really did was it showed terrorism in a very, very poor light. It really showed that these terrorist paramilitary organizations at the end of the day were playing with human lives. These were organizations which did not have any noble causes to which they were running. And then the elimination, the precise targeted assassination of Nasrallah also actually has created this huge impact in the world consciousness that these are the people who are the real, in a sense, create the real problems in a way, and their targeted assassinations in a way, more than anything else, separated fact from fiction, that this is what terrorism, this is the real face of terrorism, and what we were actually led to believe all along by the left liberal narrative was not terrorism. So in that sense, I am saying that the Israelis actually are doing a favor to the world. What they do with the Palestinians, the Hezbollah, the Iranians really is their business. And it is a business of the Iranians, the Hezbollah and the Palestinians, whatever their interactions are with the Israelis. That's a separate issue. But what I am saying is that in a certain world sense, this wool has been taken off the eyes of people that who are the terrorists. And I feel sad for the thousands and thousands of students, the protesters who are marched the streets in Western Europe, who are marching in the Ivy League colleges in America, protesting against. They don't even know what they were protesting against, because now the wool has been taken before your eyes and we can see the real hideous face of terrorism as opposed to what is being done about it. So that's the first point. The second point really is that in a very strange way, in a very unique way, I think the narrative is, the clock is actually in a way going back. It is going back to the time of 9/11 and 26/11, seminal events in history, where people are finally beginning to see, oh God, yes, these were the real terrorists all along, not what we had thought all along, as painted by, as I said, by the left liberal cabal. Now, along with that, something else was going on in the world, and that really was that this entire projection of what I call Islamophobia. See, as much as the left liberal cabal was trying to paint this picture of Islamophobia, that of painting the entire Muslim community actually as victims, was not true. What I'm really trying to say is that even within the Muslim community, even within the Ummah, even within the Muslim countries in the world, there are feelings, there are dispositions, there are political inclinations, there are interests which are completely different from, let's say, from one country to the other. What do I mean by that? Let me explain that. For instance, Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, or for that matter even Jordan or Egypt, their interests are, as everybody knows, and if you didn't know then you should know, they are different from the interests of, let's say, of the Iranians. They are different from the interests of the Houthis. They are different from the interests of Algeria or Turkey, for that matter. Like any other community in the world, the Muslim community also is a diversified community. There is no one homogeneous, monolithic narrative running out there that all Muslims are persecuted, everybody is a victim. Muslims are a very thriving community in the world. As we all know, some of the most wealthy states in the world are Muslim states. And is the Iranian conflict, or what is going on between Israel and Iran, emblematic or symbolic of what is happening to all Muslims all over the world? Certainly not. And therefore these actions actually have exposed the fault lines, because there were very important statements which have recently come, where the head of Saudi Arabia has said that he's not interested in so much in the Palestinian cause. He's interested in the affairs of his own country. And that, I think, narrative runs true for a lot of other Muslim countries also. So in a larger sense, in a broader sweep, I would say, what is really significant is that this entire left liberal narrative of Islamophobia which has been going on, and that one community in the world is constantly persecuted or victimized, this mythology has been shattered. It is now very, very clear that Muslims, like any other community in the world, some of them are strong, some of them are weak, some of them are certainly persecuted. There are shades of variance and diversity in the entire community all over the world. There is not some monolithic block. That narrative has gone out of the window. Now let's try and understand the implications the Israeli actions have for India also. And here, when we are talking about India, we have to understand that I've always in my podcast commented on the fact that we have a very thriving community in the Muslim community in India, but unfortunately the leadership of the Muslim community is probably some of the worst leadership that you can even think of. They do actually a disservice to the interests of the Muslim community. And therefore, why do I say that? Just to give the present example. When this conflict broke out, without even thinking or understanding the complexity or the contours of the conflict in the Middle East, a lot of Muslim leaders, especially from the valley, from Kashmir, they all rushed in to support Nasrallah. They all rushed in to support the Iranian actions, the Hezbollah actions, condemn Israel. I'm not for a moment even suggesting that you have to support Israel or you should not support Iran or whatever. These are personal matters. But as Indians, we have to think first for our interests, which these leaders were not doing. And therefore, you had the, what do I call, the unseemly sight of protest marches breaking out in Srinagar, in Badgaon, in Kashmir, protesting about the assassination of Nasrallah, about the so-called victimization of the Lebanese people. Absolutely uncalled for, unnecessary, unjustified, and that to my mind actually then makes you aware that there are people in our country also who will go to any extent to keep this entire narrative of the minority community, the Muslim community, as being a victimized community in our country. It is the same narrative which is, as I said, the worldwide left liberal narrative. And now, as I said, that narrative is being destroyed by the Israeli actions, and therefore it is time for some of this leadership in our country to wake up and smell the coffee, that these kind of fooling tactics don't go well with the public in India. I would say it's not only the other community, but even the Muslim community can see through the actions of this, the vested interests of the leadership in this country, who use the Muslims always as a bargaining chip in their political games to seize power. Because the larger objective, obviously, in the worldwide community of the left liberal community was obviously to seek to seize political power, and the same interests are there in India also, where the leadership wants to treat the Muslims as a vote bank and constantly capture political power. And therefore the responses in India to this conflict have not been well thought of. They have been very, very ill-timed. They leave a bad taste in the mouth of the people, because people can very, very clearly see what terrorism is, what is the face of terror, who are the people who are going after it. And it is not so much as to, as I said, I'm repeating again, to support the Israelis. That is not the intention, but rather to distinguish between who really is a terrorist and who is not. And therefore, this entire chain of events which is now taking place in the Middle East has also to a certain extent exposed to us the radical fault lines which still exist in Kashmir. And this is a warning to all the people who keep on saying that, oh, peace has returned to Kashmir and everything is hunky-dory out there. The fact is, there are certain radical elements, there are certain untamed elements, there are certain elements out there which will never see the light of the day. These elements can lie dormant, they can lie quiet for some time, but given the first opportunity, they rise, they come up on the surface, as we have seen in the present case when this Nasrallah assassination happened and you had these protests breaking out on the streets. And as I said again and again, that this kind of a separatist, this kind of, how do I call it, linkage which these people establish with the pan-Islamic movement of the world is something which is actually doesn't go down well with the people of India. And I'm sure the genuinely secular liberal Muslim in the country is also very, very uncomfortable with this, because this puts that particular person in a tight corner. They wouldn't be really appreciative of this actions, and I suspect a large majority of the Muslim community in India actually have nothing to do. They have no mind space for these kind of activities which the leadership keeps bringing back again and again in some form or the other. And therefore, this entire linking up of what people in India do with what goes on in the Middle East, for instance, what goes on in West Asia, for instance, trying to emulate in a very second-hand way, in a very third-rate way of trying to emulate the way they wear, for instance, the way the kind of attire they wear, the way they have their political interests, the way they have their priorities. Those become the same priorities, those become the same things which the leadership here wants to ape in India, which is so unseemly. You have to do things which actually are Indian in that nature, which is of interest to the Muslim Indian community, but that point escapes this particular leadership. And finally, let's also talk a little bit about how this war or the Israeli actions really have impacted the narrative in Europe and America also, because that has a bearing not only on Europe and America, but that has a bearing on the world economy. It also has a bearing on India, because we are now an interconnected economy with the world, and it will definitely have an impact on us. But the way it really impacts us, that the earlier narrative where the liberal community was actually seeking political legitimacy, was seeking a kind of a political gainsaying, as they were looking for political gains by banding protest under the large banner of the Palestinian cause. That particular duplicity, I would say, of these elements has now been exposed, because now we realize that the fissures are very, very deep in the Islamic world. The countries have different interests in the Islamic world. Israel has its own interests, and maybe so does the Hezbollah, so has Iran. There is no one common narrative which is running in these countries. So why should people be protesting so much in America or in Europe and disrupting the life of other people? I think that kind of consciousness is now coming in America, and it would also probably have an impact on the elections in America, because in states like Michigan, which have a sizable Muslim population, the Democrats, again, they are caught what is called in a Hobson's choice. At one level, they have to support Israel because that is a charter, that is a commitment of the country. They can't turn their backs to it. But at another level, they are very uncomfortable that they have to support the Israelis at this point in time when the elections are so close in America, not even a month away. And this could have an impact on a major swing state like Michigan. The Democrats would not be too happy on that. So that change is also coming. And then there are these changes which are taking place in Europe. As we all know, that in Austria, a far-right coalition, a far-right party actually has got the highest number of seats, and it is now seeking to form a government with support from other parties. The far-right, the more hardline, the anti-immigrant parties are gaining foothold, more than a foothold. I would say that they are actually holding sway right now in most of the major economies in Western Europe. So the tide is changing again in Western Europe, and therefore that's why I'm saying that the entire narrative, this left liberal cabal narrative which they had created in the world and banding everyone together under this pan-Palestinian cause protest, and in that ignoring the real terrorist actions in the world, the real terrorist incidents in the world. As I gave examples of Bangladesh, I gave examples of the terror attacks in Jammu which were happening in India, and castigating countries like India or Israel. That narrative is getting diluted now. It is changing, and therefore we have to watch out for this particular space. Very, very interesting things are going on, and in a certain sense, let me conclude by saying that the Israeli actions have unleashed something completely different, besides, of course, whatever they are doing to the Hezbollah or to Iran. That conflict is, of course, is a separate space altogether. But besides that, they have unleashed different energies, which hopefully, I'm saying, can put an end to this false left liberal narrative which has been sweeping the world all this while. And so on this note, I come to the end of this particular podcast. I hope you really like this podcast. And if you enjoy my show, please do subscribe to it. And on this note, it's goodbye and cheers from me till next time.